Good morning, BookTube, or whenever this finds you. I hope everyone's doing super well. I am recording a week after the launch of Children of Doro. I should be working on another novel. That is the constant lament of writers, that we should be doing something else. But I was deeply moved by the impact that seemed to have been felt by my newsletter on Tuesday. And if anyone is not following that, mlclark.substack.com, I am finding my groove there, I think, with the new format, and I hope you'll enjoy me for Better Worlds Theory, the written edition, as opposed to these video chats that we have every once in a while too. So in that piece, I talked a lot about the pragmatics of publishing as a self-published or indie-published author. And they were a little grim, obviously, but they were grim precisely because we have extremely inflated notions of what publishing looks like. So I wanted to take some time today to expand on some of those thoughts, the parts that seem to resonate, and to share some other aspects of process that I think can open up when we change our perspective and our expectations around it. So mlclark.substack.com, if anybody is following along there, you'll know some of what I'm talking about. If you're not, consider subscribing, because my weekly pieces there cover a wide range of themes, and I am considering moving to a twice-weekly model now that I've finally figured out a way to turn it into a paid subscription model in the future. There will always be a free weekly piece for everyone, but we all need to hustle. So if I can find a way to provide high-quality content twice a week, the second one I'm hoping will be for subscribers only, which will allow for a little more income. Why do I need income? Because the writing gig is tough, as we will talk about. So inside that piece, let me see, I'm also going to pull up some of the stats. This was the lovely image that I think sobered some people in the corner there. So for anyone just listening along, this is the one that shows my sales after it was about 5 days. The number then was around $73 US, and the number now is $80 US in profit. Congratulations, me. And on the other side, I have the book budget. And I talked about both aspects in the article because I wanted to highlight how absolutely strange this business is. I talked about this in another newsletter, I think in January, which also did quite well, which talked quite pragmatically about how publishing has changed over the years. And in that piece, I talked about my own hesitancy to dive into self or indie publishing because I know how difficult it is. Now, unfortunately, there is still a lot of hustle that goes into this industry, so people tend to celebrate the rare successes. Even right now on Netflix, there is a sci-fi series, Silo, which is based on a series of books that started as a series of self-published chapters that did extremely well. And so Wool went on to be accepted, a very rare win for self-publishers, in which a mainstream traditional publisher realized, oh wait, no, we really want to get on that, look how popular it is. The year that it happened in is really important, though. That was back in the early 2010s, extremely early 2010s, and at that time there was still a slightly different ecosystem. There wasn't as much work being published, but now if you publish, you are lost very quickly in a sea of other self-published work, and the range and quality is exceptional. So obviously there's to some extent good stigma or good reason for stigma around self-published work, and authors can try to get around that by making sure they have an extremely high quality cover, but that can be difficult because those are expensive. And so as I talked about in the article, I looked at my strategic book budget. I do not have much money. I am not doing that well right now. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, this year, in part because I helped a family in crisis, and it took a lot to be able to extract myself from that situation. I do not regret saving a child's life. The whirlwind of very confusing circumstances meant that I also helped subsidize them buying a home. It's not in my intention at all, but the circumstance had to do with the family being kicked out and living on the street for a while, which had caused the youngest to get pneumonia, double lung pneumonia, which required an intense battery of treatments to heal. Not something one expects, especially when one is living a very isolated life in general. But when opportunities fall into one's lap to be present with others, it can sometimes be difficult, especially when it all doesn't happen at once. It cascades. It always cascades. So I received a lot of help as I was helping that family, but it also set me back because I had lost my own writing income at the end of the year because many industries are not doing well. Publishing industries aren't doing well, and so reliable payment for services went away in December. In January and February, I was just caught up in this massive crisis. So I'm still recovering, still reeling. It threw my entire year off, and I am now thinking about how I can move forward to try to make the best of what comes next. But one part of that is strategic budgeting. So I mention that because a lot of people say, oh, you have to invest for success. And unfortunately, here's the really weird and difficult part, as I mentioned in the earlier newsletter in January, is that usually money is supposed to flow to the writer. But in self-publishing, if you want to do it correctly, there's an expectation that you will pay for cover art and you will pay for professional editing, and those two facets are extremely expensive, can be extremely expensive, and yet still often worth it because, again, the range in quality in self-published work is tremendous. So I avoided those two budget items by using stock images that were available under very accessible licensing, and the fact that I have some experience as with layout design from a past related to publication. And then I also took it upon myself to be the main primary editor for my work. I did have one other person helping along with when they got the proof copies. They were able to go through and look for anything that I had missed, but still a very frustrating process. I actually found a typo just yesterday, and I was so frustrated with myself because I had been over that thing many times, fine-tooth comb, and I'd become obsessive over it, which is another reason it can be so useful to have a professional editor if you can afford it, because my sanity, I lost so much of my sanity in these last few weeks obsessively going over this work with a fine-tooth comb and still having to deal with the fact that some things are going to be overlooked. And this was something that spell check would never have caught. And individual readers can sometimes miss too, and did. So 2 people going over it multiple times missed this, as well as there were other people who looked over it in many stages of development and missed it too. So it's fixed. I responded to that stressor yesterday by immediately modifying the ebook upload and the paperback upload. So anyone else, though, you have your Easter egg. And yet I have to remind myself, traditionally published work has typos too, all the time. It's normal. It's part of the process. The reason I get so stressed out about it is, one, personal. There's a strong feeling like I'm not allowed to be anything less than perfect, and it's not healthy. That's something I work on. But there's also the profound stigma for self-published work, that if you really want to prove that your work is above and beyond and worth reading, despite the fact that no traditional press wanted to take a chance on it, you have to be perfect. So those 2 anxieties weighed heavily on me. It's fixed now. That's the important part. Well, that's life. Anyway, so what did I focus on with my budget? Instead, I focused on promotions platforms. So review sites, specifically access to review sites, is extremely important for self-published work because you do not get any formal reviews elsewhere. And that can be a little bit frustrating, but again, with the sheer volume of self-published work out there and the sheer range in quality, it's understandable. I actually review self-published work. I believe in putting not my money where my mouth is because I don't have any money, but my time and my effort into supporting fellow people working on the fringes of self-published and indie published work. And I do those reviews for the Future Fire. I actually have 2 on the go right now. And I have to say, the quality has, well, there's a range to it. There are different reasons that a work won't get picked up by mainstream publishing. The last review I did for them of a piece was actually extremely well put together on the writing level. It also happened to advance it's very conservative military sci-fi, let's put it that way. It's the kind of novel where within a few pages you've got a main character who's probably like 13 or 14 when she's hooking up with a much older gentleman, because the book has a lot of gender politics that you find in conservative circles. And so you can see why that book would not have found its way into mainstream press. Maybe Bain, possibly, but extremely well written on that other level. But ideologically, there were war crimes that are sanctioned by the text. Again, it's a very conservative kind of military sci-fi that doesn't quite resonate with a lot of presses these days. So there are a lot of reasons. Other times that I have read work and reviewed work in the past, the quality has been a lot poorer. But here's the funny part. I also review for Strange Horizons, and sometimes the books that I review that come from small presses, so traditional but small, are much more poorly edited, let's put it that way. And they make me angry. I mentioned this in the article. They make me angry for the writer, because I look at the work and I think this was a promising idea. It deserved better editorial curation, and it didn't get it. So one thing I talk about in that article a lot is the fact that my stressors and my anxiety, my sense of disappointment around indie publishing, self-publishing, is also felt by a lot of folks who are traditionally published, because at some point they'll realize, oh, I'm actually not someone that this publisher is investing in much. And unfortunately in our industry, where the investment dollars go the results in the market. It's as simple as that. It's pretty frustrating for folks who have any notion of a meritocracy, but it is extremely rare when a work can rise on its own merits alone. They do need tremendous investment to get the name, the image in front of other people, which is why you see a lot of self-published writers fixating more on investing in advertising, but you've got to be careful about it. So I obviously chose a few places strategically. One was NetGalley through SFWA's program. Without SFWA's program for indie writers, it would have been far too expensive. I don't know what the results of that are going to be yet. We shall see. The other 2 were Liminal Fiction, which is a promotions platform specifically for speculative writers, science fiction and fantasy. They are terrific. They do phenomenal work in getting your work in front of their fantastically curated reading lists. They do promotion in many different forms, and I think I can say that I've seen sales specifically from promoting with them. So thank you, Liminal Fiction, and Limfic for short. And the other one, of course, is NN Light's Book Heaven, and I have talked about them before. They have curated a fantastic list of curious folks. I don't know if I've gotten any sales off of them, but I do know that many of my subscribers here and to my newsletter have come through them. So thank you to that service for providing an opportunity for me to connect with people, and maybe in the future, if those folks resonate with something I've written, great. Maybe they'll buy a book along the way. But thank you for being present with the journey. So there are strategic choices one makes there with the review sites, BookSirens and BookSprout. Oh yes, I mixed these up a little bit. That's okay. BookSirens and BookSprout are the other 2 review sites. I have not seen many people sign up for those campaigns, and most strikingly, one of those sites makes it possible for me to send advanced reading copies to other folks too, and yet not many folks picked up advanced reading copies, so it's really not easy sometimes to get people to read your work if you haven't been acknowledged by a press. And I'll say this is, again, an interesting juxtaposition, because last month was the announcement of my latest story in analog being out in stands, and I got so much more attention for that than I did from publishing this book. In fact, the day that I published this book, not a single writer congratulated me, because again, there's the stigma that self-publishing is not really an accomplishment, because you can just do it with a press of a button, even though what actually happens is you put a lot of work into that press of a button and it doesn't amount to much on the sales front. It can be tough. It can be really tough. I could possibly have been giddier and more excited and built up a sense of hype around it, but I was feeling pretty low because this was an end of an era. These 2 books, I worked so hard. I leapt countries to be able to write 5 years of extreme struggle that are still ongoing. And so there was a sense of, as I mentioned in the piece, not writer's block that accompanies the current work I'm doing now, but writer's melancholy, that sense of what on earth is the point of this? And it's tough. I am a strongly history-minded person, so I always lean on the number of writers in the past who wrote without any expectation or receipt of accolades for their work, who are now touted as extremely important in the genre, very important, much beloved, but spent most of their lives pretty miserable, struggling, and probably with that same sense of melancholy. So I wrote that piece because I wanted, in the latest newsletter, I wanted to dispel a lot of those myths of instant success and the hype that goes around the industry. I need to emphasize over and over and over again that there is very little money in writing right now. A few people are able to do exceptionally well, but even among traditionally published books, 15% of books do not sell more than 12 copies. So I am now at 16. Yeah, I am a little bit above the curve in that way, and I will break even more or less at this juncture. The stats on the side here are not quite up to date anymore, but I think I need 28 more sales at some point of this book to be able to break even on the just basic publishing costs of investing in review sites and promotions platforms. Oh yes, and my proof copies to Canada, because I can't receive them here in Colombia, so there are definitely a lot of challenges on many levels. That's okay. I also wanted to say and take time for this as well, because one benefit of knowing the limits in an outcome and having a clear sense of what it means to self-publish is that I can also be different when it comes to another facet of our industry, and that is reviews. Now, when it comes to reviews, most writers will have huge hang-ups if they do not get those 4 and 5 stars. They'll be quite frustrated with you if you are not promoting their work, because don't you know that that's an important part of the algorithm? Don't you know that publishers are looking to assess the quality of a book based on the number of books it's selling, obviously, but the metrics are extremely important too, to move the book up its ranks, and those only come down to the best of the best. So everything's been inflated to 4 and 5 stars, and a lot of writers get really hung up on the lower ones. I got hung up on a lower one for Then Raise the Dead Man High, but that was because I was really anxious and worried about representation. And the review I got, a 2-star review, said that I didn't portray Russian culture well from someone who doesn't know Russian culture. That was the funny part. They may have Russian background, but they did not have any understanding of the time period I was writing in. So they had their views. But the reason it affected me was because I was so hypersensitive, as I am when I write in other contexts, to if there's legitimate criticism of how I have represented another group of people, let me know, please. So I'm not immune to that. But I will say I was quite relieved by my response to this one. This was my first quote-unquote, it's not really a negative review in the sense it's still 3 stars. That should be fine. It's just in our hyperinflated era that we suddenly get anxious about if it's not 4 or 5 stars, if people haven't put this book on their want-to-read list, you're doomed. Traditional publishers are going to frown upon you. It's so exhausting. But this was exactly the kind of middling review that I expected from some folks, because I have mentioned many times over, I have written Dostoevsky in space, and if anybody has read Dostoevsky, I mean, Brothers Karamazov is over 800 pages, depending on your edition. It can be compressed, I think, sometimes to a high 700s or expanded to a 900. It's huge. And it's filled with a lot of psychological analysis, and it's filled with these long, protracted dialogues between characters hashing out different philosophical perspectives. I have warned people over and over, it is Dostoevsky in space. It is a challenging framework. Of course, that's not going to be for everyone, and of course, that's going to be challenging if people expect a snappy space opera. So this kind of review here, and for folks who might not be able to read it, it says an excellent story, very original, and I found that endearing because I can't take credit for the originality. Yes, I have done a spin on this story, but it was inspired by a base text. So I think folks who are aware of that tradition will know that it's not original. It's an interesting take on this. It's building on it. It's mine, obviously, but it's not completely out of the ether, if anything can be said to be out of the ether. So this person went on to say, having said that, I found it far too wordy and felt like 50% of it was a slog just to get through certain parts of it. I almost put it down several times, but I'm glad I didn't. As I said, it's a fantastic story, but its verbosity is the only thing that kept me from giving it 5 stars. So I lost 2 stars from it being Dostoevskian. That's understandable. Again, these are the kinds of reviews I will expect from this work, 100%. I mentioned on NetGalley, I warned people it's philosophical science fiction, it's different voice, be warned. But I did not do that on the Amazon page because the Amazon page is supposed to just provide back copy, in which I talk about how the AI narrator gushes about their protagonist. Fair warning. But this is good. This is exactly what certain reviews should do. Because what happens if another person is just looking for a regular snappy space opera and they pick up this text instead? They're going to be disappointed. These reviews are not for me. They are for other readers, which is why I emphatically tell people, leave your honest reviews. And also, if the book doesn't serve you, let it go. You don't have to finish reading it just to be nice to me, if anyone has picked it up in that regard. If it's not for you, life is short. Find something else. That's okay. And let other people know if you feel like it. This wasn't for me because of X, Y, and Z. If you also are someone who looks for X, Y, and Z in their work, maybe it's not right for you too. I would love for us to have a literary context capable of sustaining these kinds of conversations, but instead we have one in which there's very little money. Everyone is frantically pushing to become a high mid-list or a front-list author in an industry that is extremely niche and exclusive, definitely, focused a lot on people who have the geopolitical positioning for it. If you're living in one of the major literary towns, you're much more likely to get ahead, and the rest of us, we just get by, which is what I'm doing by working now on the next novel, and which leads to the final part of what I wanted to talk about today, which is just how scattered our current media system has become and how much of a challenge that also poses for a lot of writers. I have to catch up on my Patreon posts. I've been falling a little bit behind in them because I'm doing so much writing in so many other places, but I do need to produce content for both tiers there soon, and I will. But it's fascinating how one both needs to be dynamic and continue to lean into new forms while sustaining the old. So this Substack is working terrifically, and I will continue to grow on that platform, as is this BookTube, and I will continue to grow here. At the same time, there is the juggling act of making sure I have distinct content for my wonderful patrons who have gotten me to this point in the first place. And I don't think I am at all unique in this, whether people are scattering to the wind from Twitter to Mastodon, to Blue Sky, to a variety of other spaces. We are all struggling to figure out where are we going to find our audience, where are we going to find our people, and more importantly, where are we going to find our community. There is a difference between all of those. So I hope everyone has patience with themselves and with others around them in this very complicated, slow collapse of existing publishing ecosystems. Twitter was a central hub for publishing, for better and for worse, and we don't know what's going to come next. So we have to lean into honesty and integrity with each other wherever we find each other, and just try to make the best of it. So again, I really thank everyone who resonated with that newsletter, which is why I wanted to do a piece reflecting on 1 week after publication of Children of Doro. I hope it finds its audience. I hope there are some people who read it and love it. And again, if you have the Easter egg edition, thank you. Really well and truly, these are maybe artifacts that will be worth something down the line. But for now, my deepest thanks to folks who understand that this is a journey, because all around you, if you have creative people in your life, the struggle between creative practice and stability is an ongoing one. And again, because life is filled with a lot of chaos. I am definitely hoping not to fall into any further chaos on the life front anytime soon, but I have a lot of work to do now to build better systems and to recover so that I can invest in the next grand project ahead. Anyway, that should be enough for me for now. Much love to everyone who listened in. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Enjoy whatever you're reading and take pleasure in the goals and expectations you set for your own creative practice. Cheers, and until next time.